One of the key problems in healthcare is that they want to make customers rather than cures. Making these cholesterol-lowering drugs is just a money spinner, and this is one out of thousands and thousands of drugs, and that's like a fundamental problem in healthcare.
If you give up your autonomy and your agency to the experts, you can be misled. It's really on us to take charge of our healthcare, as well as so many other different areas of our life.
We are made of 70% water, and a lot of people don't realize water can act as a battery, so it's basically our energy. Just saying that sentence to a regular doctor, they would just be dumbfounded. Consciousness doesn't live inside our skulls, it's something outside of us, and as much as scientists have tried to find memories in a brain, they haven't. And that's part of what they want. They want us to think, oh no, hypnosis isn't real. They don't want people to know that remote viewing or telepathy is possible because it sounds outlandish, but it's actually validated physics. And then when you start to look into this, the military, of course, have been at this for a long time.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the Sovereign Mindset Podcast. Today, we have an excellent conversation lined up for you. We have Dr. Sara Pugh in studio. So, Sara, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike. It's nice to be here in person in this lovely space.
All right. So I'm going to just jump right into things with a question, and that is, what is wrong with modern healthcare?
Okay, that's a big question. I'll just give my quick background. So I worked as a biochemist and I worked on statins, which people may have heard of, about cholesterol-lowering drugs. And one of the key problems in healthcare is that they want to make customers rather than cures. And making these cholesterol-lowering drugs is just a money spinner. And this is one out of sort of thousands and thousands of drugs. So it's sort of based on money, not curing people. And that's like a fundamental problem in healthcare. And once that sort of is registered in people's minds, I think they view what's really going on a bit differently. And also the other big problem is people are not encouraged to take health into their own hands. And they can easily be indoctrinated into a system that just wants to sell them more drugs and then more drugs to deal with the side effects of the drugs, without empowering people to either improve their health, improve their mindset, something which we'll be talking about, and this idea of disempowering people and making them be dependent on a system that's driven just by finance.
So the modern healthcare system, then, I would imagine, has all these misaligned incentives between the patient and the healthcare provider itself. And that's a big part driven by the profit motive. And in that situation, the patient comes second. Is that kind of a good summary of it?
Yes, and the patient's disempowered. And also, if they want to do their own research, say, into different ways of eating, for example, we were talking about the carnivore diet, keto, Paul Saladino's way of eating, they're just ridiculed and said, oh, no, you must eat the food pyramid. What are you doing looking things up on Google? And if people want to talk about stuff like seeing the sunrise or grounding more for their health, they're just sort of laughed at, oh, that's just for hippies. Whereas the key aspects of getting healthier is getting back into touch with nature. That's a very important thing, which a lot of doctors wouldn't even tell people. Maybe you'll feel a lot better if you got up in the morning, went for a walk, just simple things like that. It's just more, you've got this disease or this problem. That's another thing, labeling people all the time, or you've got ADHD or you've got diabetes, and telling people there's something wrong with them and they've got this disease, which is very easy to manage. It's just you've got this, here's a drug, out you go. And if people want to say, well, I read on the internet that maybe hypnosis could really help with my ADHD, they're like, oh no, that's a load of rubbish, just take the meds, off you go. And people are not offered alternatives which they could do, and a lot of these alternatives are free as well. So that's the other barrier, is that by not allowing people to do their own research, not encouraging people to learn about how the body and the mind works, and just being dependent on biochemistry, as in drugs, is something I think's a big problem with healthcare. as well. And nowadays, there's so much information out there that it's not about lack of information, it's about wading through what's true, what's not, because there's amazing information, as we know, on the internet, but then who do you listen to? Who else is out there just trying to sell healthcare ideas just for money? There are really helpful supplements out there, but there's also a lot of snake oil. So I think a lot of it comes down to people being able to be educated about science, because a lot of people didn't like science very much at school. Maths and physics is what people really don't like, but learning biochemistry and biology in a simple way of how does this apply to me? How do I work? And how do I look after my health and my mind myself without being dependent on the medical system? But in saying that, I just want to say the medical system's brilliant for healing broken bones, peeling people off the road after road traffic accidents. They're very good at some things, but when it comes to stuff like hormones, mental health, metabolic disorders, that's where there really is a problem.
From hearing that, the way I think of it is that modern medicine, or Western medicine in general, looks to its system for curing symptoms through pharmaceuticals and really dismisses any other alternative that's a more holistic approach, from nutrition to quantum biology and so forth.
Yes, exactly. And also, they just assume that people are stupid and they don't know anything. Whereas a lot of the way a medical doctor's trained, no disrespect to anybody who's been to medical school, it's really hard work, but they maybe do 3 months of biochemistry, 3 months of pharmacology, and then they're expected to just know everything. And their education's actually very lacking in how far science is progressing, because even the textbooks that I used were 30 years out of date, and a lot of scientific publications don't get published until about 5 years after the information comes out, and then doctors are trained using these textbooks and these papers, so their knowledge is actually extremely out of date as well. So that's the other problem. It's dated information, and it's also something called a very reductionist approach, not a holistic approach. They just look at these symptoms, these test results, and then they'll think, well, what can I do to help this patient? I can either give them an operation or I can give them medication. And that's because that's what's in the doctor's toolbox. And it's not necessarily the fault of the doctor. It's also the way in which the medical system's constructed, that they have specific guidelines of what they can do with their patients. So they have specific ways of making a diagnosis. And then, for example, in mental health, we always keep hearing about these new sort of mental health situations people have, usually because there's a new pharmaceutical on the way out. So they create new mental health situations in order to sell people new mind drugs, for example. I think things like generalized anxiety syndrome, it was just they would have had a new, I think it was a slightly different benzodiazepine out. So they needed to label people in order to give them these medications. So it's one of these approaches that there's a lot more to how the body works. Even just biochemically, we're way more than just a lump of meat or an ongoing chemical reaction. There's huge more to what a human being actually is.
And to that point, then I would see that as another problem with modern Western medicine, is the fact that everyone is treated through the same kind of lens.
Yeah.
And the same standards and the same procedures, where I think if we look at quantum biology, just from what I've gathered, it's a much more individualized approach to healthcare. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the lens that medicine looks through is, as I'd say, a biochemistry, and a human being is a chemical reaction and a lump of meat. Whereas if you look through a quantum biology lens, it's how light drives biology and our hormones, and also water, because we are made of 70% water. And a lot of people don't realize water can act as a battery. So it's basically our energy. Just saying that sentence to a regular doctor, they would just be dumbfounded. But when you look at the physics behind how water functions and how it can conduct electricity and it can power us, and then we have these little things in our cells called mitochondria that make water, and something called ATP, which is an energy, but mitochondria making water for us so that we can have this water battery to power us is a fundamental paradigm shift. And then the idea that light and the signals from light can not only just wake us up in the morning and help us sleep, they drive our neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin for feeling good. And then we need darkness to make something called melatonin, which is really important for sleeping and healing in the night. But then also all these light signals through the day help to orchestrate all of our biology. So it's sort of like the light has so many possible signals. It's like a giant switchboard, and humans and the way we work are extremely complicated. And light has the ability to be able to drive what a human being is, which is way more than just a chemical reaction and a lump of meat. I haven't even gone into magnetism yet, because I think for people, the idea that they're a water battery and that light controls their hormones and their neurotransmitters, I think that's quite a big thing for people to take on board, because a lot of people know what dopamine is, and it's about being motivated, feeling good. Low dopamine people tend to sort of either be depressed or they deviate into addictive behavior. So that's very important. And the idea that light can change our dopamine levels could be mind-blowing for someone who's struggling with addiction or lack of motivation. And then the idea of the water battery. An example would be, we all know when we travel and we just sit down and do nothing, we're absolutely exhausted. But then an airplane in an airport is probably one of the most dehydrating environments on the planet. And that's when I'm describing to people how water is so important for our energy. I don't mean the water that we drink, like the 8 glasses a day. It's something called fourth phase of water that's inside our bodies, our inside water. And the airports really rob us of this water. And everybody will agree that being in an airport can feel like having run a marathon.
Is there a reason why airports specifically?
Well, it's because, first of all, airports are full of radiation, because you've got thousands of people and their phones. You've got all of the electronics to drive all of the systems inside the airport, all the gates and electronic passports. Then you've got all of the electronics to do the airplanes. You've got radars. It's endless, the amount of different kind of tech that's in an airport. And then on top of that, most people will know in the airport, when you walk through duty free, everything's really brightly lit with LEDs. This is what we'd call artificial blue light. And it looks amazing, but that kind of light is really unnatural. And the way our mitochondria work, they really like sunlight, which has got sort of the right balance of blue and red. And that's very helpful for them and for our water battery. And then when we go inside into this environment that's the complete opposite to being outside on the beach, this is where the blue light, first of all, inhibits our mitochondria, so they produce less water. And then this radiation basically is like being in a microwave. And we all know what happens if we cook meat in a microwave. It goes all dry and tough. So in simple terms, that's why the airport's dehydrating. It stops the mitochondria making water for us, and also it depletes our own, what I would call fourth phase or EZ water, just by the nature of how radiation interacts with biology.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for that whole explanation. We've ventured now into a topic where I'm not the most well-versed at, and that's this idea of fourth phase water. And you're saying it's not the water that we drink that's important in regards to the subject. It's the water that we produce from our mitochondria.
Yes, and also this fourth phase of water is sort of like liquid crystalline gel water, and it lines every single surface in the body. And this water also does something called charge separating, and that means electrons and protons can flow. So in simple language, it now begins to act like a battery. So if we're in an airport, it's like trying to run our tech when the battery's only half functional. And most people know how exhausting it is traveling, so they've kind of felt it in their own bodies.
How do we produce this water? And is it normally the case that we are not in the most optimized state to produce this?
Yeah, exactly. So first of all, just to go to the opposite of the airport, when we're outside, say on a beach, where we're in the sun, and that's making us act like a solar panel, and our mitochondria thrive on sunlight, but also the type of light that's outside helps to do something called expand the exclusion zone. So it makes us have more water, so our battery's bigger. Also, when we're outside, say on the beach, we can be grounded, so we're connected to planet Earth, and that's when we can draw what we'll just say electrons or charge from the Earth. So that's extra sort of battery for ourselves. And we all know that we feel good when we're outside in the sun with our feet either on the sand or in the sea or on some grass. And then this all favors our mitochondria. So when they're under stress, say in the airport, that they're struggling to just about get by, and they're making less water and less energy, and they're making more what we'd call free radicals, which people may have heard of, that can be, under the wrong circumstances, a bit sort of damaging to us. Whereas the complete polar opposite is being outside where we belong, and everything in our biology is functioning properly because we've got the right kind of light, full spectrum sunlight. We're grounded, sort of not being isolated from planet Earth. So it makes the correct recipe for our biology to function as it should.
So I just want to go back towards the modern medical approach to all of this. And first of all, kind of play devil's advocate. And I want to look at it from them to the patient's point of view, where the patient does their own research, goes through all their findings, and comes back with questions and sources and stuff like that, where perhaps modern medical practitioner would be like, you know, this is why I am the expert. It's because I've gone through all this medical training, and you've just done 2 hours on Google, and now you're challenging my medical diagnosis and prognosis. What would you say to that? Like, is there traps there for the average person where they might come across bunk medical information that is kind of snake oil like? And does that give the medical practitioner, modern medical practitioner, kind of that validity to say, you know, you're coming to me with all these conspiracy theories and all of this, you know, snake oil medicine. This is why you have to listen to us. Is there validity to that?
Yeah, I'll do both sides of the story. So maybe 25 years ago or 30 years ago, before we had the internet, the public didn't have access to science really unless they were very well read. So people were they would just believe their doctor because they didn't know any better, because they didn't, unless they'd have studied science or read a lot, they wouldn't have known, or trained in some kind of practice. I mean, there are people that train in holistic things like Ayurvedic medicine or yoga, and we know that's a whole other whole podcast, where they would realize, oh, actually the modern system's nonsense because the ancients had many, many things which helped. But on the other hand, I think if somebody went on Google and there were suggestions to give up seed oils, processed food, and they went to their doctor and said, yeah, I've read on the internet that I want to give up gluten, processed dairy, sugar, seed oils, what do you think? The doctor can't really argue with that. Maybe they'll try and argue on the seed oil front, so that's okay. But say if the person had been on Google and found a load of supplements, for example, and had no idea about any of the biochemistry, and then came to the doctor and said, yeah, I've found this big blend of vitamins, these peptides, this, that, and the other, and I've read somewhere that this can help me rebuild my shoulder tendon and help me with my diabetes. That's a case where the doctor is going to be, hang on a minute, you know, what do you know about biochemistry? Those are the two different scenarios. If somebody said they'd found quantum biology and they wanted to go outside more, go to bed earlier, and ground more, I really don't think any doctor was going to argue with that, because the doctors have to work under artificial light in front of a lot of tech, so they probably feel bad. So they would like to go out as well. But
it seems common sense too, right? Because also this has been in practice before, where nurses would roll their patients out into the sun in order to get fresh air and sunlight. And it's kind of, we all know that when we're in that state, we all feel better energetically. And so I would imagine it would be hard to go against that as a doctor.
Yeah, but I don't think doctors realize how powerful the light is. They might say to the patient, "Oh, that's a really good idea. I'm really glad you're going to go and walk your dog in the morning, and you're not going to watch Netflix until 2 a.m. And go to bed early." But I don't think that's going to cure your diabetes. But they don't realize how artificial light and can really screw with people's blood sugar. So I think that's where the doctor might be, okay, this is great, the patient wants to do this, but I still think he needs to, or she needs to take metformin or something like that. So that's where there might be a little bit of, that's a great idea, but what I've got to offer you is better. Whereas some people do have high blood sugar and insulin resistance because of their light environment and the way that they're treating the light in the day. So they don't get enough light in the morning or in the daytime, and they get too much artificial light at night, or sleep with televisions and tech in their bedroom, because there's lots of studies on light in the bedroom at night. It's called ALAN, like artificial light at night. There's lots of studies about how that can cause cancer, diabetes, obesity. So that's well known. But that some doctors may not realize how powerful the light really is for their diabetic patient. And then if the diabetic patient said, "Oh, I've heard about a keto and a carnivore diet that doesn't have any carbs in it and sugar, I want to do that to help with my diabetes and my obesity," it depends on the doctor there, because some doctors understand about carbs and diabetes, and other doctors will say, "No, you just need to do what you're told and take this metformin, take this insulin, because I know best." So it does come down to the level of education of the doctor. And this loops right back to the first question you asked me, what's wrong with the medical system? And I think doctors are only given one lens, and they look through that. They're not trained in nutrition. They're not trained in movement. They're not trained in anything to do with quantum biology, because it's very physics heavy. Or they've just seen a load of hippies grounding and seeing the sunrise and think it's woo. But on the other hand, there are doctors that do believe in mindset, meditation, self-development. So it does now really depend on the doctor that you end up seeing, because you might get a young, forward-thinking 25-year-old doctor, the kind of doctor people say, "Oh, I went in and my doctor looked about 12. That kind of doctor might actually be the best for bringing new ideas forward. Whereas somebody who's 60 and is really fed up of the system and just wants to retire, and he'll say, "Well, for the past 40 years, I've done it like this. I've had thousands of people with diabetes. They all go on metformin. Their blood sugar goes down, even though the background of the diabetes is still there." So I think it depends on the medical professional.
Yeah, with that said, are we seeing a shift in modern medicine then, with the rise of social media and influencers coming out who are really advocating for this? Paul Saladino being one that comes to the top of my mind, because I see him all the time on my feed. And it's somehow starting to seep through society, the idea of seed oils being bad, even the idea of sunlight being a curing mechanism or a healing mechanism for the body, grounding as well. All of these, from my vantage point, are ideas that, over the past 5 years are now breaking through to the mainstream. Is that also seeping into modern medicine, do you think?
Yes, I do. I think it depends on the doctor, though, because even if a doctor themselves wants to avoid seed oils and ground and do Pilates, they may not be allowed to tell their patients to do it, because doctors are still human. So they must feel bad as well sometimes and wonder, well, I'm only 45. Why do I feel so terrible? I'm a doctor. I should be able to heal myself. So I think it catches up with them. So definitely with social media, I think it depends on the doctor and how they present themselves. Because I think British doctors wouldn't watch Paul Saladino because he doesn't really wear any clothes. And I think that's kind of a big American thing. But obviously he has to show his body to say, I do this and I look like this. And it's part of his sort of persona. And also Paul's very well read and he does know the literature well. So I think some people might take him seriously. He's a psychiatrist, I think, by training. So I think it depends I know what you mean, that there could be doctors that laugh at Paul Saladino, but on the other hand, he doesn't. He references scientific studies and he looks healthy. But then there are other doctors like Dr. Ken Berry that people know quite well. He is in the keto and carnivore space, so I think it depends on the doctor. I mean, there are doctors who kind of, or they would call them, they wake up, as they would say. I don't know where this will go, because when we had COVID, I think doctors separated into different camps there, and a lot of doctors saw, oh, this is not right. But then they're kind of stuck in whether they can actually tell their patients to do that.
Yeah, that's another interesting point, how the system basically traps doctors through the incentive structure, through having power over them and making sure that they follow the rules. If not, they get penalized in some type of way. And so even if a doctor doesn't agree with a certain process or procedure, they still have to tread that water lightly in terms of communicating that, because it could get them in trouble because they're not following standard protocol.
Yeah, exactly. In the UK, we have the NICE, or the NIC guidelines. I have a very good friend, Dr. Ahmed Malik, who's an expert in all of this. And it is set up that there's this complicated hoop jumping bureaucracy that doctors have to go through, and they have to follow the NICE guidelines. And he was saying that even if the outcome is better, because he had his own way of doing surgery, so he had very good outcome, but that on the way he wasn't following the guidelines, yet his outcomes were better than other doctors. But they was like, no, Dr. Malik, you can't do this anymore because you're not following the guidelines. So sometimes they are just interested, are people ticking boxes, not did the patient recover as quickly as possible from back surgery and things like that. So there's also, exactly as you've said, that the box ticking protocols and not looking at how many patients got better and went back to work with no pain after having a back operation versus how many were still in pain and the operation may not have been a success. So yes, there's that problem as well.
And you mentioned briefly at the beginning your kind of background, but I'm interested, were you kind of in the modern medical space and then realized that there were some things wrong? You mentioned with statins and so forth, but from what I gather, you were in the research side of things?
Yes. So I did a degree in biochemistry and genetics, and then it was around the time when the Human Genome Project was underway, and all the venture capitalists got very excited because they thought there was going to be like 100,000 genes and they were going to patent them and they could make designer drugs based on individual genetics.
Wow.
And then when the results came in and there was only about 26,000 genes, and sometimes something like a cauliflower has more genes than a human, the amount of money lost during that period by people who really had their money on the table thinking, oh, we're going to really cash in here, came as a real shock. And I think after I saw that, because that was in about the year 2000, I realized, hang on a minute, there's something not quite right with this system. Then I did a PhD in something else. It was in protein folding. So that relates to Alzheimer's, dementia, those kind of aggregation diseases. But it was very physics-based. And then I went into biology, more biological, which was statins and heart cells. And the reason I left was we had to do this project, and the grant said, can you just find anything positive to say about statins? Just go and think of some experiments and do show us something that makes statins look good. So that was what put me off. But it's a lot of the time with scientific research, the money's given because something's trendy, or you can patent something and make money at the end. Because just looping back to things like water and water batteries, there's no money in water research. So that's why it's not so well known. Whereas anything to do with maybe someone will invent a drug that can cure Alzheimer's, people will be all over that. So there's a lot of bias in who gets the money and what gets researched in science, because it's all back to the financial incentive again. And then scientists and their information is what is then given to doctors to train them. So if the scientists are all about the money and doing research, not for knowledge, but to think, oh, how can I make a new drug? That information then gets filtered down to doctors. And then a lot of scientists are the ones who teach doctors. So if they're not right, then the information that doctors are receiving is not the full picture of what really science and biology and how a human works is.
Yeah, I would imagine that what's the goal is what the driving force. And if the goal is to make money through the research, all the research is going to be skewed towards that goal.
Yeah.
And so from the results to the doctor, to the information passed to the healthcare industry, all of that is going to be skewed towards the best possible outcome for, the people funding the research, which is to profit.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are obviously people can self-fund as well, but also there is like publication bias. And the other problem in science is there's something like about 80% of the things we discover, we don't publish. They just end up in the drawer. And the journal of all the experiments that never worked, that would be extremely valuable because we need to know what didn't work, not what did work. And then, of course, there's certain things like back to supplements again, that certain very wealthy supplement companies can fund their own research and produce all these papers claiming that what they made has these amazing benefits, and nobody can stop them doing that because they've got the money to fund it. So that's another problem.
How much is this the medical industry's fault, whether it's the pharmaceutical industry or the hospital industry, versus the individual's fault for just giving in and outsourcing their responsibility to take control of their health?
That's a really good question because I've worked in science. A lot of people basically live in an echo chamber of bullshit, and it's a lot of really intelligent nerds together that all just love doing experiments. So sometimes they don't even think outside the box, even though they're extremely intelligent people. All they want to do is their experiments, and they don't really think, I wonder what's going to happen with this result. And I've always wondered this: do people who make pharmaceuticals do it on purpose, or are they just nerds or people that just want to do their job and all they're doing is following a procedure? Because I've never worked in the pharmaceutical side. Some of my friends have, and I think it's a great big hierarchy that all the scientists probably have got no idea what's going on up here. They're just told, you're developing this, it has to affect these receptors, it can't be toxic, and it needs to be water soluble, go and make me this. So they just go off and make it. Whereas one of the pharmaceutical companies, say Pfizer or whatever, might have another idea. So I actually don't know whether I don't think it's the same with doctors. Some of them might know really and don't care, and they just want the money, say in sort of more private practice. They just think, I just want all these patients, I'm getting paid a lot of money. I don't think they're actually getting better as they should, but then what would I do instead if I lost my job? And then there are people who know it's wrong, but they've got families and they just have to carry, or people have spent, 30 years and 200 grand training to be a doctor. And then they think I can't just walk away now. So I've thought that for a long time. Whose fault is it? But then I think the pharmaceutical companies are so enormous, we don't understand really how many pies they've got their fingers in,
how much power they have.
Yeah, and also they're linked to the big food industry, because obviously the big food industry is all about making money and thinking up new delicious treats to get people addicted to, and different crazy flavors of Doritos, because if people eat food like that, then it makes more customers for the pharmaceutical industries. I use diabetes as an example because that's kind of a good one. So you can see how the big food industry and say the pharmaceutical companies that want to make diabetes drugs can benefit from each other. So the food companies are part of it. And you've also got big agriculture, that there are ways to grow and farm crops to make them tasty and delicious, but not necessarily nutritious. And then we probably won't touch on sort of pesticides and glyphosate. So there's a whole other problem about agriculture and trying to get as much produce for as cheap as possible that looks good and tastes nice, but probably isn't particularly nutritious. So you've got all of that in this equation, as well as all of the dermatologists, the sun cream companies and the sunglasses companies telling people the sun's going to kill them and they must slather themselves in sun cream and wear sunglasses all the time. So that it's coming from multiple angles.
Yeah, it's the way I see it is it's a big mess.
Yes.
We live in a world with so many different narratives, and right now so many of them are being exposed as false and faulty. The incentive structures are all messed up. And so I really think it's incumbent on the individual now at this point to figure things out for themselves. I think, as you mentioned, with COVID, a lot of people realize that the expert class doesn't necessarily have it all figured out, and that they're just as prone to groupthink and following the program. And if that program is being handed down from nefarious sources, if you give up your autonomy and your agency and your ability to think for yourself and you outsource that to the experts, you can be misled. So, I take more of the perspective that it's really on us to take charge of our healthcare as well as so many other different areas of our life. And getting into that now, practically speaking, right? When we talk about quantum biology, what are the impacts of some of the features or some of the aspects of quantum biology? For instance, sunlight, how does it heal you? What is the misconception there as far as, the view from the modern medical industry to like what's been revealed now with science and how sunlight heals you?
Okay, I just wanted to loop back to what you said about COVID because it's all about fear. And because we've talked about statins, people are frightened. Oh no, if I don't take them, I'll have a heart attack. So a lot of this is all fear driven. So people have been made to fear the sun because it's, you'll get wrinkles, which that aesthetics is a good way to scare people, or you'll get skin cancer, which other artificial light is heavily involved in that. But I think just to go really basically into how does sunlight heal, when it comes to light and circadian rhythms, it's like the clocks in our body. So we talked about airports before. We can imagine our body like a big airport with lots and lots of moving parts, and everything has to happen at the right time. From organs like digestion, we want that to happen when we eat food, and the bowel movements, they happen in the day, not the middle of the night. And then the liver wants to do its detoxing when we're sleeping, not sort of crashing about in the day. But this goes all the way down to individual cells, that we want the cells to divide or not divide at the right time, because cells that divide or not divide at the right time we would call in simple terms like cancer. And then we've got all of our genetics, and we want our genes to be switched on and off at the right time. For example, in our house, we never have all of our lights and computers and electronics on at once. We switch things on and off as we need them. And that's the same with our genetics. And fundamentally, our clocks in our body, whether it's a big clock like an organ clock or a little cell clock or our gene clocks, are all driven by light. So if we are isolated from natural light, we could end up with a really crazy mess of timing in our body. Like if if the clock's broke in an airport for half an hour, it would just be utterly chaotic. It's the same with our biology. So the very beginning way that people can do that, it would be getting up and seeing the sunrise, because that's a signal to the biology. Okay, the day has started. We'll switch on the right hormones that you need in the morning. We'll get the ball rolling, and it sort of then sets people up for a good night's sleep at night. So morning light and seeing the sunrise is really important for setting the clocks, because throughout the day our clocks drift a bit. So we need to see the sunrise again to put them all back in line again. And that's probably one of the main reasons why bad circadian rhythms are so heavily linked to cancer, whether we're talking about people that do night shifts who've got a terrible circadian rhythm. All of the timing in the body is all over the place. So things are just not happening when they should. People's detox pathways are not on time. The cells are not dividing when they should. And it's well known that terrible circadian rhythms is a recipe for something like cancer.
As I'm listening to you, I'm just realizing that this seems all just basic, foundational knowledge, that before we go to any drugs or any procedures, it's like, let's get our environment and our interaction with the environment correct first and see if that cures the problem. It just seems like common sense to me as I hear you talk, because, okay, if the sunlight regulates our hormones and our circadian rhythm, and you're not in alignment with that, your body then is not functioning how it's supposed to. And so, why not try first waking up with the sun, getting light in your eyes, and then, getting to bed on a proper time so your liver can detox and so forth. And it just seems like common sense that this is kind of the first approach you want to take before you go to like pharmaceuticals and so forth.
Oh, absolutely. Because sometimes it's just breaking it down. Say if someone was all brand new to quantum biology, all you want, I just say to people, you just want everything in your body to be on time, like an airport running smoothly. Because if the airport doesn't run smoothly, you've all been there where the planes get cancelled and it's chaos, and people are like, oh yes, I understand. And then people just need to get to sleep, because I agree, we have a difficult life and things are stressful and there's toxins and heavy metals and blue light and all sorts. But if people can sleep properly, then they can heal. And if you can get people to get their clocks in line, their circadian rhythm, and get the right kind of light in the daytime to switch on their hormones and then make their own neurotransmitters, so they don't need antidepressants and all these psychiatric medications, because that's a big problem. People can be on like 3 by the time they're sort of 30, and then help people to be able to make it the appropriate darkness in their bedroom. So a nice pitch black bedroom without televisions and light and stuff in it. That's the beginning for people of how do I get started. And then, like I think I mentioned before, to not be on your phone before bed watching Netflix at 2 a.m., to dim the lights, get some blue blocking glasses, help your brain start to get ready to go to sleep, because biology is quite slow. It doesn't like surprises. So you can't just be blasted with blue light, say go shopping in the supermarket at 10 p.m. and it's crazy light, and then get into bed and expect your body to just go to sleep. It needs a wind down. That's why seeing the sunset can be helpful for people, because they're getting the signals, then dimming the lights, wearing the blue blockers, really nice dark bedroom that our biology is used to, because it's thinking, okay, it's pitch black now, I'll make all of the right hormones and everything for sleeping, and then I'll go to sleep and I'll stay asleep, because waking up in the night a lot is a big problem for people as well. And just that, getting your clocks in time and getting sleep, that would be the very beginning way to explain to people how it can help them. Otherwise, this, as you know, it could get really, people can get overwhelmed with too much information. But I think a lot of people could easily start to do that.
That's a great approach. And that airport analogy is fantastic, right? It's just like, your body's a complex organism that things need to be functioning on time in order for it to run smoothly. Mm-hmm. But I want to get into another component of quantum biology, which we hear about often, which is blue light. And you touched on it. And I take it, another reason why that's important is because of, regulating our hormone cycle. Is there other harmful effects to blue light besides disrupting your hormone cycle? Oh,
it's really bad for your eyes. Mm. And as people have probably noticed, people are wearing glasses or eyeglasses earlier and earlier and earlier. And in places like Singapore, where there's a lot of tech use, people have got myopia, like short-sightedness way earlier. And then there's a rise in things like macular degeneration, and definitely just blasting blue light from, say, a computer screen or a phone into your eyes for 12 hours a day. It's not the right, it's isolated light that's not natural anyway, the artificial light. It's a particular part of the blue spectrum. And it's normally when we encounter sunlight, there's a huge range of different wavelengths or colors out there. We've got the ultraviolets, the infrared. If you're just shining blue light from a screen into your eyes, they're just not designed for that intensity of light for that long, without, because our eyes and our body are used to a great big rainbow of lights at all of frequencies. And also, for some people, the simple solution would be to work outside, because then you can work with the sun, or open a window, or you can wear yellow blue blockers that are sort of going to block some of that light from the computer. And there's certain software that you can get to turn some of the blue down. So even if people have never realized how damaging blue light is for their eyes, the solution to it's not complicated. It doesn't mean people have to give up their day trading job, because that's a very computer heavy job. Or say if someone was a graphics designer or a video editor, there's ways to be able to still do your job, but protect your eyes, because sometimes people just didn't know, and they only find out because they get macular degeneration and they're sort of 45 or 50, because it's sort of something that normally people wouldn't see till they were sort of in their 70s or even 80s.
And so what other aspects to quantum biology are there that are pretty approachable for the average person to do that go a long way in terms of optimizing their health? Like, is grounding another one?
Yeah, definitely, because when we look back at sort of studies of when people, you can see these graphs, and it sort of starts in the 1950s, and it sort of goes in an upward trajectory of how many heart attacks there are, how much obesity there is, how much diabetes. We know that it's kind of gradually gone up and up and up. And some people will say, oh, it's the seed oils. Other people will say, oh, it's the blue light. Other people will say, oh, it's the pollution. But also around about that time, people stopped wearing leather-soled shoes, and they transitioned into kind of rubber-soled shoes. So you can add into that graph that we're not connected to the earth anymore. So there's more to it than just absorbing electrons and discharging a negative charge. It's actually an important aspect of spirituality, and that's another thing. People are not connected in that way anymore. So what I'm saying is that when people started changing the soles of shoes from being leather to plastic or whatever, or discouraging people from running around barefoot, saying, oh, it's kind of dangerous and things like that, that's another part of this reason of why people are getting sicker and sicker. Because I don't think it's just one thing. I think it's all of the things that I've listed, including not being connected to the earth with our bare feet.
Yeah, it seems like the modern way of living has removed so much of those primal aspects,
yeah,
which made us human.
But I think also you wanted to ask how can a daily life person incorporate this? Because you can buy leather-soled shoes now that they're back. There are things called grounding shoes, or what I wear in my shoes if I'm having to wear, say, trainers or sandals. You can just buy a simple anti-static strap, which electricians use, which also will ground you. Because I appreciate that some people may not want to walk around barefoot. There might be dog poo or glass or insects or scorpions. So I get it.
That's a wide range of hazards.
Yeah, but also it depends where you live. That some people, once they start walking barefoot again, it's not just about grounding. It's when I used to teach movement, because I taught movement for 10 years. I think a lot of it is because people do it barefoot, like martial arts, you do barefoot, yoga, Pilates barefoot. And this idea of letting your foot be free, just not locked in a shoe, because all of your biomechanics, if you've got like locked up feet, everything above you is going to not function as optimally as it could, because obviously your knees and your hips and your back and everything are going to move differently. So with grounding, I think the act of not wearing shoes and walking about also benefits people a lot as well.
How important is it where you live in terms of optimizing your health, especially for quantum biology? I know when I moved here to El Salvador, one of the things I love is the fact that there's no daylight savings time, and El Salvador, it's a pretty consistent waking up with the sun, like at the time that you're supposed to wake up. So like, let's say the sun rises at 6 a.m., it stays there all year round, right? And so I just find that my day is a lot more routine over here. Are there more optimal places to live in order to, optimize your health, or can you optimize your health anywhere?
I think you can optimize your health anywhere because there's huge benefits, but you've touched on something really important about the stable light cycles, because in the UK, it's the opposite, because in Scandinavia is even worse because the sun can rise at 5 a.m. and then set at 10. So when you've got these stable light cycles, first of all, it helps people get in a routine.
Yeah.
And never underestimate the power of just simple things like a routine, but also from a kind of, we were talking about how light drives hormones and mental health. Say if somebody's got mood instability or bipolar or some kind of mental health situation where their moods are really up and down, a stable light cycle would be really beneficial for them because everything's the same. And then I think there are plenty of studies that show that more heart attacks and cardiac events happen around the daylight saving. So I think for, like you said, not having the clocks change, that would be really help. The sun is very beneficial for anything to do with cardiac disease, and also autoimmune diseases can be really helped, especially things like MS with more sunlight. So there's lots of benefits to here. Also, it's quite a magnetic environment because of it being volcanic. And we didn't touch on magnetism. I think that might be a bit too much for people, but it is an important part of human health.
Well, I'm happy to get into it.
What with magnetism?
Sure.
I'll just introduce it briefly. So there's a guy called Dr. Dean Bonnelly who did a lot of research into magnetism. He's passed away now, and he did an experiment where he put mice in something called a mu metal cage, and it isolates them from the magnetic field. And then his other group of mice were just in ordinary magnetic fields. So the ones isolated from the Earth's magnetic field, after a few days, they started to eat more because magnetism can provide us energy. But then the mice started to move less and less, and like in slow motion, and then a few of them died at the end. So that's just a simple experiment to show how important magnetism is for human health. And in simple terms, just to tie in with the rest of this podcast, it's just a way, an additional way in which we can get energy, because it changes how electrons and protons move. Or in just another simple way to explain it is that humans evolved in a magnetic field. So we need to be connected to magnetism to be healthy. And the way to not be connected to magnetism is to be away from it, like high up, like the top of a 30-story building or in an airplane. Whereas if you go outside and you want to get magnetism, you just need to be close to planet Earth. You don't need to take your shoes off. And we won't go into how the magnetic field's actually declining, and it has been for thousands of years. And there will be a pole shift at some point, and it's not a conspiracy theory, but there are people who are very sort of clued up on geology and geography who know that there'll be a magnetic pole shift. So the magnetism has been declining, and people started to measure it. It was Gauss. He was a particular scientist in the 1800s. He began to measure it. So there is scientific evidence that the magnetic field of the Earth is declining, and it was probably 10 times stronger about 10,000 years ago. And we do need magnetism to run our biology. So that's something else that contributes to this increase in chronic health. So just in simple terms for people, something like going camping and sleeping outside on the ground, that would be a good way to access magnetism. Or just go outside and be close to planet Earth. Visit somewhere like El Salvador that's magnetic. And then in terms of other countries, places like Greenland, Iceland, because they're close to the poles, they're more magnetic than, say, somewhere that's close to the equator. So back to people who are now thinking, oh, no, I can only heal in El Salvador. You can use a very magnetic place like Iceland or Finland. Even though you don't have the sun, you've got the cold and you've got the magnetism, because there's a lot of benefits to cold exposure as well, or cold thermogenesis. That's something I have to do a lot in the UK because we don't have the sun like you do here. So embracing the cold, because cold has got huge benefits for neurotransmitters, insulin resistance, leptin resistance, inflammation. So that's something that you don't have here in El Salvador, the cold, whereas the people in the north, if you want to live there, you have to embrace the cold.
And so then embracing the cold has health benefits as well.
Massive. Yeah, that's why you see a lot of people doing the ice baths and things. Even Joe Rogan, I think, has, we've had him jumping in his ice bath. So that's one thing that, people have ice baths here, but they'd have to build one. But you've got the sun. So, you can, people who live in El Salvador get the sun, because one thing that cold exposure can do is it makes us make our own ultraviolet light on the inside. Whereas here in El Salvador, you can get the ultraviolet light from the outside. So first of all, you need that to make vitamin D, which we didn't really touch on, but that's one of the key ways in which sunlight's really healing. But then on the other hand, in the northern countries, we have to use the cold to make ultraviolet light on our inside. And then we can use the cold to control things like blood sugar, moods, because cold exposure can boost dopamine and noradrenaline. So it helps us not get sort of winter depression.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
First of all, can we break down how cold makes you produce ultraviolet light internally?
Yeah,
sounds like such a sci-fi concept.
Yeah, it does. But also when you stress cells, it's really well known they produce ultraviolet light. So when you expose people to cold, it is stressful, but it's kind of something we'd called hormesis, that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Same as fasting or exercise. So there are people who say, oh no, you mustn't do cold thermogenesis because it's too stressful, but we have to stress ourselves a bit in order to get stronger. So it's not just about like buying an ice bath and making it absolutely freezing and jumping into it for half an hour. If you've never done an ice bath before, you'd have to gradually build it up. Or you wouldn't go swimming in a lake in the UK or Iceland in the middle of winter, just crack the ice and jump in if you'd never done it before. You would build up to it. But the way people start is they would have a cold shower or get a bowl of water with ice in it and stick their face in. And then they can start to feel, oh yeah, wow, I felt really good after that. But then it's not going to massively, say, stress out a person who's healing. And then you kind of build from there. So there's plenty of studies about the benefits of cold. I think the best one recently, they had 2 groups of soldiers in barracks, and every soldier we can almost say is as identical. It's identical environment. And then they did cold therapy on one group of soldiers and not the others, and measured a whole load of sort of biochemical markers, their mood and things like that, and found a significant improvement in the soldiers that did the cold thermogenesis. So it's not just about making the ultraviolet light, because it does sound sci-fi-ish, but then back to what we've been talking about, ultraviolet light's demonized. People think it ages them or it's going to kill them, whereas it's vital for making melanin, which we haven't touched on either, which is a pigment, and it's way more than just a suntan. It offers sort of us protection. It can help split water to make energy. So when people get exposed to the cold and make UV light on the inside, you can help to make melanin on the inside and move your melanin around. And this is very relevant for the brain, because Parkinson's is something a lot of people have heard of, and it's a problem in an area called the substantia nigra, which is black because it's full of melanin. So there's a very important link to the melanin we have on our insides and our brain and nerve health. As well as having enough melanin on our skin so that the body can suck it in if it needs it. And like I said, melanin is more than just a pigment. It offers us protection as well. So using the cold and the sun is obviously the best combination of all. That coming to El Salvador for a vacation and then going back somewhere cold and doing a load of cold therapy and mixing and matching, that's what I do for my health. And then I think there are places in, I think Mexico, the cenotes, where it's absolutely freezing, but it's really sunny as well. So the cold is really important too.
You know, I've heard that kind of having that dichotomy between hot and cold, and, you know, the shock that your body absorbs from both of those is kind of, it produces a healthy response.
Yes, yeah, there's heat shock and cold shock protein. So we're not meant to just sit in a room at ambient temperature. It's when we think about sort of brown fat, that's sort of Mother Nature's antidote to diabetes, because it's very metabolically active. So people that just have their heating on like too high all the time because they don't want to be uncomfortable and just sit at the same temperature, they're not getting adapted to either cold, which, you know, humans, you know, too much cold's obviously stressful and horrible, but an appropriate amount of stimulus, dose dependent, is very beneficial. And it's the other side of the coin, which would be saunas, which we know have huge amounts of benefits. And people like in Finland, they're crazy for saunas. And I think there are more saunas than people, but then they have a really low level of dementia in that country. And they also won the happiest country award again about 3 years in a row. And they're probably one of the biggest sauna cultures. A lot of the Scandinavians do as well. And they are healthy people, even though they've got terrible light. And I think what's really affected Iceland and Finland is bringing in the artificial blue light. That's sort of affected their health statistics. So people can be really healthy in places that aren't sunny, but you have to embrace the cold. And then adding in like the sauna, exactly as you said, the extreme that there's benefits as long as people do it sensibly. You know, like a 2-hour sauna is just going to be hugely stressful, whereas a couple of like 3 or 4 half-an-hour saunas a week's really healthy. The same with cold therapy. If people just do 5 hours of cold, that's really stressful, but, you know, a good, you know, cold exposure, some lake swimming, whatever they've got access to is really beneficial. And I think for people who are very interested in productivity, I think cold plunges are a really good way to sort of wake you up without having 5 Red Bulls or whatever else people do. And anybody can access within reason sort of cold. That's one thing it's hard to have here, a cold shower. And trying to move ice around to make an ice bath here, I think would be quite hard work. But there are cold plunges in El Salvador. But it's like a luxury here, whereas in other countries we can just go outside if you want to be cold.
You know what I do is I grab the ice from my freezer in the morning. I throw it in a bowl. My sink is actually shaped in a bowl, so it works out perfectly. And I dunk my face in the ice for about a minute or two. Taking breaks to breathe, obviously, but I do it for the inflammation. However, it's funny because I realized afterwards I feel refreshed and rejuvenated and invigorated, and I found it a good way to start my day. Any thoughts on that?
That's really good because first of all, the cold plunges stimulates oxytocin as well. So that's like the love hormone, we'll just call it. Then it increases noradrenaline, which will sort of, or norepinephrine, I think it's called in the US. So it sort of wakes you up and so it's very good for mental health. So there's that aspect. And then also the cold could be helpful for making collagen. So getting the body to make its own collagen is much better than just taking collagen supplements because it needs copper and vitamin C to make collagen. And also red light is helpful as well. But cold will also stimulate collagen production. And then I think also in that pathway, it stimulates something called BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotropic factor. And in just simple language, that helps people learn better. And it's kind of rejuvenating for neurons. So just a simple face plunge like you're doing has massive benefits. And, anybody can do one.
Interesting.
There's actually like another thing that I add to that. If you make the water carbonated, like fizzy, you get a double bonus because when the bubbles pop on your skin, it attracts, it creates a sensation and you get extra blood flow and more nourishment to the skin. So that's my little hack.
Yeah, that's so funny because, there's this viral video that went out with this guy who basically some influencer and he poured, I would imagine bubbly water, right? Some of this fine bubbly water. And it's funny that you mentioned that as part of like an actual health routine in order to, take more benefit from the actual ice plunge.
Oh yeah, because carbon dioxide, that's another thing. People think it's bad when it's really important. And you can buy, some people have carbon dioxide baths, or you can buy a CO2 suit. Because people, for whatever reason, think carbon dioxide's a waste product and oxygen is the life product, where it's not like that at all. So yeah, just a simple soda stream or San Pellegrino, stick your face in and make it cold. And then there are people that will just go next level. There's a whole other world of water, like nanobubbles. It's not just hydrogen water that people like. You can get CO2 water, nitric oxide water. Once you get into quantum biology, it's like no matter what, there's always more. But like you said at the beginning, you have to start somewhere and keep it simple. So yes, the fizzy cold face plunge does have other like big daddy hacks attached to it, but for the audience it does actually work. It definitely is really good for skin, and like you say, you just feel good after. And if people want to look up the science of which neurotransmitters get stimulated from a cold face plunge, they're welcome to, and it's safe for everybody. So it doesn't matter if somebody's got an autoimmune disorder or adrenal fatigue, they can still do a cold face plunge, but they shouldn't really be doing full-on ice baths until they're a bit more healed, because it can be a bit stressful. But yes, that influence, some of the funniest videos, people just laugh and there's actually truth.
Yeah, I thought it was just him being pretentious, and that's interesting that there's actually science behind it. Dr. Sara, what do you do? Do you take on clients? Do you have what do you do as far as your practice?
Oh, what do I do? So I make courses to educate people of different levels, simple, and then I've got a practitioner course. I help somebody called Kira Lee with her Quantum Health Academy in Australia. So that's sort of high level science for training practitioners. And then I make content and I have a podcast. So I've got everything from free to like a small courses for people who are just starting, and then sort of practitioner training courses. So that's what I do. And I always tell people to look at my free stuff first, because there's a lot there that people can implement for themselves.
Yeah, well, just based off this podcast, I'm new to all of this.
Yes.
I interviewed Kira the other day,
Yes.
and so I'm now just becoming familiar. We were talking earlier about how, this seems like a lot. It could be overwhelming, especially once you be conditioned your life to live a certain way, and then all of a sudden you're receiving all this information where it's telling you that, hey, you got to look out for this, and this is harmful, and that is harmful. And so almost to the point where you just want to just back away and not even pay attention to it. But I think the persistence of, I would say, this quantum biology movement, and the information that they've been putting out from different influencers, it starts to seep and penetrate the subconscious, and you just start being more aware of things as well.
Yeah.
And then you apply certain things here and there, and you're like, wow, I actually do feel better. Like waking up with the sun, doing these little optimizations here and there actually does make me feel better. There must be something to it. And so, yeah, I've been approaching this kind of baby steps, but one of the main goals I have getting into my 40s now and on is, optimizing my life to be as healthy as I can as I enter old age. So yeah, it's been an amazing journey. I'm really thankful for you coming on here and just dropping a wealth of information and knowledge. Is there anything else you want to cover?
Just quickly, one of my other favorite phrases is test, don't guess. Because I'm wearing a CGM at the moment, one of those continuous glucose monitors. And then back to clients and things, I think also, if in doubt, get some tests and do your own experiments. But then in terms of what could somebody buy now and learn a lot from, I think a continuous glucose monitor, because it not only you'll see how your exercise affects your blood sugar, you can see your sleep, your food, and how it changes with light. And for $60, I think, and 14 days worth of information, I think in some ways it's worth more than a lot of labs. I mean, I love labs and HTMAs and collecting data and looking at people's data versus their lifestyle. And then for people who aren't sure, is this going to do anything? They can see the numbers for themselves. But I think as blood sugar, so many other health things pivot off blood sugar. And if people have got good blood sugar control, their moods are better. And everybody, including doctors, all agree if people have got high blood sugar or insulin resistance, they're going to have inflammation and open themselves up to much worse diseases, including cancer. I'll just leave it there that, test, don't guess. And just something simple that anybody can buy, like a CGM, can be really helpful for somebody who wants to start to either optimize their health or adjust at the beginning and have no idea out of the thousands of these blood tests they could have where to even start. I would just say start with something simple like a blood glucose meter and move from there.
Amazing. I have a little bonus section here that I want to get into.
Oh, no.
And this is, I think, moving away from the quantum biology, but maybe not. And we were talking about hypnotism and remote viewing and how you're into that. And I just kind of want to get a rundown there because it's something that I've never heard of before. I've always kind of dismissed it as kind of way out there, but you say there's something to it. And so I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, definitely. So I got into hypnosis because when I was teaching movement, people would suddenly tell me something really personal and I didn't know how to deal with it. So I got interested in hypnosis, but straight away I wanted to do stage hypnosis because I wanted to know, are they really being a duck or riding a giant chicken and laying a square egg, or is it all fake? And that's how I got into hypnosis and discovered that no, there are a population of people that are really hypnotizable. Like we're all hypnotizable to some extent, but some people called a somnambulist is more hypnotizable than others. And if you get a somnambulist, you can literally, to them, it's like being on psychedelics, but the hypnotist is the puppet master, and people really do think their friend smells of like dog poo, or they're sitting next to Madonna. They're not actually pretending. So that really fascinated me straight away.
Can we?
Yeah.
What's that person called?
I'm a somnambulist.
A somnambulist. And are they just highly prone to suggestibility?
Well, they're just much more hypnotizable than others. So when you watch a stage hypnosis show, you start off with, say, an audience of 100 people, and you warm them up because, yes, it's a lot of it's based on sort of psychology and getting lots of yes sets and things. And after a while, when you do a group hypnosis, you start to notice that some people are much better at it than others, and other people are too distracted. It doesn't matter whether you believe in hypnosis or not. It's got nothing to do with intelligence either. There's sort of policemen and surgeons and stuff that have ended up being the star of the show. So in terms of stage hypnosis, because it's for entertainment, you have to work with the audience. And then as you're warming them up, you do lots of little miniature bits of hypnosis with them. And then you're picking out, oh yeah, this person here is good. I'll get them. I'll invite them up. So what you're doing is you're selecting the best ones to do your show with. But when they actually go into hypnosis, you do the whole sleep thing, and then we call them skits, which sometimes it might be the person next to you's become invisible, or every time you hear this music, you're going to jump up in the air and say cock-a-doodle-doo, and they're not faking. Every now and again, you might get one person that's just a faker, but on the whole, this thing's real. So I thought, oh, that's really interesting. And then much later on in my life, I got very interested in the science of spirituality and action at a distance, as we'd call entanglement, because there is actually, we won't go into the physics of how this works. This is a whole other podcast. So from knowing about action at a distance and things like telepathy, because my goddaughter has very severe autism, and then there's a podcast called the Telepathy Tapes people might have heard of, where they're on, I think, series 3 now, about how children with autism are like really good at mind reading and telepathy. So I've always known that telepathy was real. And then there's people like Rupert Sheldrake, who's pretty famous, about how dogs know when their owners are coming home, and then telepathy amongst husband and wife, or people who you're close to, or sisters or twins. So there's definitely this idea of consciousness doesn't live inside our skulls. It's something outside of us. And as much as scientists have tried to find memories in a brain, they haven't. And there is physics, somebody called Dan Winter, he's kind of the pioneer of how this works. So where I'm getting to is that it's possible to be able to project our consciousness outside of space-time. And that means things like remote viewing, which people might think is sci-fi, way more sci-fi than us making ultraviolet light. Biologists have known that for 100 years, whereas the whole thing about remote viewing, it's about what we'd call looking at a target and then being able to see something outside of our environment. And then when you start to look into this, the military, of course, have been at this for a long time. And there's a place called the Monroe Institute where a lot of the public, they can learn and train in remote viewing. And it sounds utterly crazy, and people think it's so ridiculous and stupid, like hypnosis. People think hypnosis is so stupid, they don't even bother to try and learn. They think, oh, they're all faking, they're just pretending. And that's part of what they want. They want us to think, oh, no, hypnosis isn't real. They don't want people to know that remote viewing or telepathy and action at a distance is possible, because it sounds outlandish, but it's actually validated physics. And then the military have got numerous sort of experiments all about remote viewing, and it gets sort of a bit darker that they've actually got sort of remote hurting and remote healing. So this idea that we're a lot more than we think we are, and that our consciousness can exist outside space-time and outside just this room and projected
in another dimension almost.
Yeah, there's also, we could think about it as parallel dimensions, and that kind of, when it gets into really crazy spirituality, when I'm just introducing this to people, I don't want to like talk about other dimensions, because some people are like, whoa, this is way too much already. But when you explain to people, oh yeah, you must have sometimes with your husband or wife, you both just say the same thing at the same time, or your phone rings and you know who it is, and people are like, oh yeah, that happens all the time. And then they're kind of a bit happier with that. And then every now and again, people will have a dream where it comes true, like precognition. But then with learning remote viewing, what people would have to do is it is better if you do it in a group and you get given set targets, and then you go away and you have your targets and you meet again in a week. That's how I learned. And then the person who set the targets can see how accurate people were. And with all of these things, even including hypnosis, it's all just experience. So the important thing for people is, just because something sounds absolutely ridiculous, it doesn't mean it's not true. Why not just try it out for yourself and look into remote viewing, look into the military studies, and you'll see that the military have been at it forever.
And what are the benefits then that you see from like actually trying this out? Like, why would somebody even want to, even if they could?
Remote view. Well, I suppose I think it's the high level would be sort of nuclear codes, and then there are all sorts of because as soon as you start talking about remote viewing in the military, it straight away opens up all of the UFOs and the UFO bases, and people, talking about, we're not alone in the universe anymore. So I think, and you also mentioned other dimensions and ETs and things like that. But I think in terms of why would people want a remote view, I think in the beginning it's just to show people their minds are much more than they think they are. And that the idea that someone sets you a target and then people are able to go into meditation, get like some information and realize, yes, they did actually see Buckingham Palace or the crown jewels and they were correct. It just is a way that I want to try and get people out of this idea they're just a lump of meat. And the power of the mind is way more than just sort of affirmations and manifesting. This idea that people can talk to each other remotely, or you can see things with your mind without even being in the same room as them. So in terms of the studies they've done with the autistic children, they'll sometimes have the children in one room and items in a different room, and the children can easily remote view and see what's in the other room. And then people can verify that nobody's making all of this up. And then when it comes to remote viewing, I think I only learned because I'm like that. I mean, I learned close-up magic. I learned stage hypnosis. I was like, oh, this sounds fun. I'll just learn it. But then you went in straight away and say, what's the relevance? Another relevance is finding lost people, finding a body, finding a lost animal, those kind of things, the more sort of professional remote viewers. And then obviously really high up, it would be military grade, which is for spying and things like that.
Interesting. And as far as hypnosis, I've heard of self-hypnosis, and that is basically getting the mind to believe certain thoughts and breaking through certain mental barriers. Is that the benefit of hypnosis as well? Or
Yeah, definitely. Because the thing is, hypnosis is really powerful for phobias, because we're only meant to have a few phobias, like falling and loud noises, and I suppose to some extent snakes and things like that. And all the other fears we have, for whatever reason, something happened in our childhood or later, and then we've developed this phobia. And people can develop a phobia just overnight because something happened when they were a child, and all of a sudden they're terrified of water. So that means something like hypnosis, you can easily get rid of a phobia in one session, because people can develop a phobia just from one experience. So I would say it's most powerful, it would be getting rid of a phobia for certain. And that's something that can be done in one session often. And then people use it for giving up bad habits. Like we could be here all day listing what people come for. And when they've done studies, the hypnosis actually outperforms nicotine patches. And our National Health Service has sort of groups that people go to, and they have nicotine replacement, but hypnosis is better than that for giving up smoking. Like everything, it doesn't work on everybody, but sometimes it's not the person's fault. Maybe the hypnotist wasn't very good. So, and then for doing self-hypnosis, that's sort of, it's slightly different that somebody else is guiding, but in terms of getting into these different states, I would say things like a flow state and a bliss state, they're more useful than hypnosis, but they're all related, and it's all the same idea that we can experience altered states of consciousness that are very productive without having to take drugs and things like that. And it's all back to how the mind is way more than we think. And even if somebody doesn't like the idea of somebody else like coming in and changing their brain, maybe that's what that person needs, that they can't do it themselves. And if somebody comes in and helps people get over some negative thinking or a past belief or a trauma by hypnosis, that can unlock that person to become whatever they're supposed to be. Because when you live in your own head, sometimes you can't see out of it and you need somebody else to come in and help you with it. And then, of course, there's all of the past life regression hypnosis, and that's a whole other topic as well, that maybe it's a fractal of a memory, or maybe somebody really was that person in a past life. And and you probably know people who are utterly convinced that they were something in a past life, or they met their soul, they find soul friends and soul mates in this life based on a past life. And unless you embrace the idea of your mind being way more than you think it is, then things like hypnosis, self-hypnosis, remote viewing, telepathy, action at a distance is not going to be accessible. So the only thing I would ask of people is just to be open-minded about it and think that the government or whatever we want to call them, don't want us to access our minds like this. Because imagine what would happen if all people, all of us, if everybody on the planet woke up tomorrow and we could all interact with each other at a distance, or have dreams and know the future, or remote view and see things. That would really mess stuff up. So they want us to think that we're just nothing, whereas, people have to embrace the idea, try it, but also there is very validated physics to explain it all, which might be a bit too much for this podcast.
Yeah. But I just wanted to scratch the surface there, just because we talked about it. And I found it interesting subject to just kind of broach.
But I think it's really important for your audience, because the other thing about remote viewing, which my teacher Tony Rodriguez said, that if you try and remote view things like the stock market or Bitcoin, you can actually change things. Because if you remote view and see something you shouldn't, the way in which physics and time really works is that you can end up influencing things. So I know that there will be people straight away thinking, oh, no, I'll try and remote view into the stock market, or things like that. But who knows what might, it's one of these things. I think a lot of it is, even if people have no idea what they'd use it for, the fact that their brain can do this, I think, is just mind-blowing for people, and it empowers them in different aspects of their life as well.
Interesting. Yeah, I would say a few years ago, I would have thought this is all baloney. And no, I don't know to what extent all of this has legitimacy. I'm just kind of hearing it for the first time here. But I will say, after my ayahuasca journey, the world of possibilities has opened up, because I saw things there that were kind of unexplainable from our physical world and the laws of physics which we operate by. And it also made me realize that there's much more to the psyche and to the spiritual world than than we're led on to believe. And going to that theme of like limited potential, I think that we have been held back in a lot of ways, and through, our environment, through our schooling, through our society and the entertainment and all of that stuff has limited our potential to such a degree where, we're really operating below our capacity, like to a significant degree. And figuring out what our power is and how to embrace it, and then how to wield it and act with agency is a big step for humanity. And if people start figuring that out, it creates a problem for the current power structure operating here.
Oh, exactly. And then I think with psychedelics, that's a whole other fascinating subject, be it psilocybin or DMT or ayahuasca. Just if people have that experience, it's like, I think, was it Terence McKenna said that the only death risk is that you die of astonishment. And I think it's something that once you've seen that, you can't possibly describe it. It's like about 7 dimensions all at once. And then you just sit and think, how did I even think of that? What and even if like you were talking about, what can hypnosis be helpful for? Sometimes people who are just in this rut of thinking, like this cycle, something like a psychedelic experience can just derail all of the negative thinking they're having, and it can be like a life-changing experience. I'm more now at my age, more interested in just the slow way of doing it naturally, because sure, the mushrooms and things might lie or be having a laugh, because they're definitely, I would say, an extraterrestrial energy. But on the other hand, it's something that how the brain made that is just, I'll never get over how amazing. It's like sometimes you watch an amazing film, like I think Avatar, I'm just wowed at the graphics. These kind of serotonergic things, especially DMT, is just a whole other level of, like, what made such something so incredible. If you know what I mean. I mean, with your experience, I've never done ayahuasca. I've tried DMT, like, because that's probably an entry thing, because if it all goes wrong, it's over in 5 minutes. But it's kind of the whole thing about when you were asking about other dimensions. I think if people are interested in that, then those kind of things is another. But they definitely don't want people accessing this.
Yeah. So, I mean, my view on psychedelics is I don't recommend it.
No.
I don't recommend people do it. I think it's a lot of information all at once. And
and it can fracture people's psyche. But on the other hand, that's why I had to be the devil's advocate. There are people who are stuck in addiction or a shit life and a rut, and one experience transforms their world. And there are also studies on psilocybin and LSD for addiction and terminal illness. I think accepting death, I think it can be very helpful for people. But no, I'm not recommending it. But then, because I've done it, I don't want to say, oh no, I'm allowed to do it, but you're not. I think it's when people do it all the time and then think it's real and believe the mushroom rather than think for themselves or develop their own, because we can access our own bliss states and psychedelic experiences without things. But, just like the same as you, it's something that it's how your brain makes those pictures. I'll never understand.
yeah, part of it felt like it was coming from within. Part of it felt external. It was like I had been transported somewhere else.
Yes.
In a way, and that's why I mentioned it as another dimension. That's why I brought up that word, and I know it's kind of new agey, but that was the only way I could explain it. And I'm not into like new age at all, but like I saw things that were unexplainable.
Yeah.
And so you gotta like somehow integrate that into your worldview and find some way to like explain it and rationalize it and stuff like that, because it's just so different from what I've known to be true. It like had me rethink everything I knew to be true and re-examine it and somehow try to fit it in a coherent worldview. And that part can be very disorienting. And that's why I recommend people don't do it, because the way I describe it, it's a shortcut to the divine, but you're going through a very dark alleyway and you don't know what you're going to find in there. And some people make it out the other end intact and some people don't. That's the way I describe it.
Yeah, no, that's a really good description, because I was about to say that sometimes if you think you know everything, and you do something like that, you realize you know nothing and you have to start all over again. And I think that's really good for people, because no matter what I learn, the more I think I know, the less I know. So I'm always open to being wrong or to new ideas. And I think for some people, they actually need to be shown in that way. What you think the world is absolutely nothing like you think, and then they can have the rest of their lives to work. Because I know some people that have one experience and it so blew their mind, they thought, okay, I'm completely wrong about everything, it doesn't matter, I'll just start all over again and be open-minded. And then there are other people, like you say, they get really sucked in, and it can get expensive, and some of it could be a bit dangerous, and it's
I think people could lose themselves too.
Yeah. And also certain, like I think I've mentioned, like some mental illness, mental health situations, there are certain people it could trigger something. But like anything, it serves its purpose, even if it's just to show somebody what they thought the world was is completely wrong, which there's different ways that people wake up. I'd rather just do it the slow way now, in case I don't want to get false information, because I think there are people who can then get sucked in and think they're channeling from an ET or an angel, and then do stuff that isn't really them. And it can be very disturbing for families or friends that don't understand.
Yeah, we're getting deep into the subject now, but
we can leave it,
I just
Yeah, we had to. We're just being honest, I think.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that point because prior to doing ayahuasca and entering that world, and I've only done it once, I thought the idea of entities or anything outside of the material world was kind of fanciful. But when you enter that world, you realize, oh wait, there are other things out there, and they do operate in different planes of reality. And yeah, it's just one of those things where I think you open yourself up to those entities, and you got to be real careful in that regard. But I think that is a good place to.
Yes.
We did broach the subject. It was really interesting. I'm going to look into hypnotism and remote viewing, but yeah, I want to leave this towards the end because it's a little bit different from the health topics, but it's also fascinating. So, Dr. Sara, I can't thank you enough for coming on and having this amazing conversation. It was very enlightening.
Yes.
It was very filled with real helpful information, and thank you so much.
Oh, no, it's been my pleasure. It's been great fun. This is very good space here.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you.